Kia ora koutou. So I work here in Nelson on the fauna science team, and I've been working with whio for a few years, so hence my bit of the talk's going to be about whio, and then I'll hand over to Josh, who'll go on to talk about the care, kahurangi care and predators and so on. So care and whio, they have a few similarities. They're both quite large birds, around 800 to 1,000 grams. They both nest on the ground. The females alone incubate, and they're both vulnerable to the same suite of predators. They're at the upper range, size range for stoats, I would say. So I'm going to give you a brief history of whio and kahurangi as I go into the talk, leading into my talk. So in 1998 to 2000 was the first full survey of whio distribution and abundance through the national park, Kahurangi National Park, and they found whio were widespread but with low numbers. In about 2009, and so back then there was no predator control or whio management or anything in the park. About 2009, they established two whio security sites, one in the southeastern side, the Wangapeka Fife, and one over on the western side, the Oparara Ugly. And with those security sites, they set up riverside stoat trap lines, and then subsequently introduced whio nest egg, and then bred for release, where they reared juveniles in captivity and then released them back into the wild, which really boosts the population. 2010, there was a second survey in the northern portion of Kahurangi, and they found no change in numbers compared with the original 2000 survey. 2011, a nest study was started in the southeastern, in the Wangapeka Fife by Motueka Dock staff. 2014, 2016, 2019, there were the first big battle for a bird 1080 operations through Kahurangi, and during that period there was rapid population increase with whio. In 2016, I started working with whio, and we took over that nesting study and continued it on until about 2019. At the same time, so that was in a river that was trapped and had 1080, looking at nesting success and adult survival and so on. And at the same time, we started work on a second river which only had 1080. We were interested to know how well whio do with just 1080, keeping in mind that a large proportion of Kahurangi gets 1080, but it doesn't have traps. So 2019, that nest study ended, and we wrote up the Wangapeka Fife part of it, seeing how whio go in a trapped and 1080'd river. Couple of findings from that, which are kind of relevant to this, were that adult female mortality was higher in winter than in summer. Lots of studies have shown that whio are particularly vulnerable during nesting, females getting killed on the nest, but we found that during winter they were more vulnerable. And the other finding that's of interest was that in the inner reaches of this large block that we studied, with the Wangapeka Fife, about 40,000 hectares, model population growth was only positive in the inner reaches of that block. So that's with 1080 and traps. So the other nesting study in the other river with only 1080, we had to abandon that because it was a very expensive study with lots of helicopter hours and so on, and huge variability in the nesting attempts between years. So we were struggling to get data. Now, we knew that whio were, we had an inkling that whio were getting pretty abundant in the park, and we knew about the original 2000 survey, so we thought, well, it's a really good time to resurvey the park. So after the nesting study finished, we moved into the the big survey, which is kind of what I'm going to talk about. And you'll see 2022, there's a big decline, which I will talk about. So, oh shit, what have I done here?
Click on.
Oh yeah, sorry. Here we go. So onto the survey. How do you survey FEO? Well, you basically walk up a river with a GPS on your shoulder, and you're mapping the river as you go with your GPS, and you're marking any birds that you see. If you look closely, you'll see a pair there, and yeah, and you're often carrying a pack with your tent and all that, because some of these surveys are multiple day trips up a river. And yeah, you walk up the river and map birds. Now, there's a few rules around surveying in the sort of FEO are very crepuscular, so particularly during the warmer months. So if you're surveying in the warmer part of the year, you have to do very early mornings and late evening surveys. During the middle of the day, they're often not out on the river. In the middle of winter, which is actually the best time for surveying, sort of from now through till end of August, you can survey right through the day, because the birds tend to be out on the river during the day, right through the day. During the surveys, we're conducting habitat assessments on all the waterways. So which these assessments particularly focus around the river stability. River stability is a key factor in determining FEO presence or absence on a river, and there's a whole lot of things to look at in conjunction with that, which will hopefully get used when we do some modelling on the results of all the surveying. So yeah, you're walking up a river, occasionally you get to some tricky spots, like here, big boulders, boulder jams, gorges, and so on. But at the end of the day, if you're lucky, you get to camp on a lovely little beach beside the river, and then you start it all again the next day. So onto some survey results. So this is what it looked like in between 1999 and 2000. The red lines there are the rivers that were surveyed, and the little white dots are pairs. So as you can see, the FEO, they were quite widespread, but they got pretty low numbers. So I'll just get across here. So this here is kind of what it's looking like, what it was looking like after we started in 2020, winter 2020. And you've got to keep in mind that this survey's taken three or 4 years to do, because, well, obviously it's a very big park. We added a whole bunch more rivers in the mix. Those rivers, you can see on the eastern part of the park, a lot of those weren't surveyed in the original survey. And we were actually surveying it during a time of change. So we hit the park at peak FEO, right? 2020, there were lots and lots of birds, and we got really high densities of FEO. We were having in some bits of river up 2 pairs per kilometre, which is kind of pretty good. It's about as good as you're going to get for FEO. But as you'll see, things started changing about 2021. So this picture here is just a snapshot of all the surveys that were done for the kind of official survey. I hope it makes sense. We've got a little bit about the history of predator control in the park. This shows 2006. It's a bit hard to see, but those blue, you can see all those blue sort of lines and blobby bits, they are stoat traps. So in the bottom half of the park, you've got can I make this go on there?
Yeah, it's going.
Oh, it is going. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So where are we there? Yeah, in the bottom sort of over on the left there, you've got the Oparara Ugly security site with its stoat traps. Then down in the bottom right here, you've got the Wangapeka Fife. In the sort of middle here, you've got the Friends of Flora, Friends of Cob trap network, and then up there it's the Gullen Downs trapping network. And then if we go across to 2007, the pink is 1080 operations. 2008, some more. These are all Osprey operations, I think. Yep. And then 2009, there were couple of ops around the edges. 2010, nothing. 2011, that was an osprey operation, and you can see that was the Wongapeka Fife actually. When it had its first operation. Nothing much. 2012, 2013, nothing. And then 2014, sorry, I've gone, hang on, where are we? 2014, that's the first big battle for our birds operations through the park. Now it's about here that things started going well for whio when the population really started increasing. And then 2016 again. So that 2014 and 2016 operation, I reckon, were key for that rapid population growth. 2017, a little bit up at the top, nothing 2018. And then 2000, oh, I've gone back, sorry, 2019. This is the these operations that didn't go so well. In 2020, so the Wongapeka Fife had its last operation back in 2020 and 2021 and so on. So nothing much since 2019 really. And so I'm going to zoom in. This is the Wainaro River, which was our other study river, the one that only had 1080. In 2018 during our nesting study, that's the top part of the map. You can see we had a lot of birds. So all those yellow triangles are colour banded pairs. So really high density of birds on the river. We knew all their territories. You know, I was walking that river every fortnight from end of August right through to, you know, end of January, doing, you know, breeding status and all that sort of thing, observations. So we knew the birds really well. We did the official kind of survey as part of the big Kahurangi survey in 2022 on the Wainaro, and lo and behold, I noted a decline in the number of pairs that we had, gone down to 12. So that kind of prompted me to got me thinking and prompted me to go and look at a few of our other rivers that we'd already surveyed, which you'll see in a minute is what I did. So the current, having been back to the Wainaro numerous times since 2022, the bottom part of the map there shows what I reckon it is now. So having done repeat surveys on a bunch of rivers, this is a subset of the, you know, obviously of the whole park. So lots of these rivers I've been back to multiple times. You're looking at all this big decline. The Wainaro is there up in the top. So that 27% drop, that's comparing 2024 with 2022. So as I said earlier, these rivers have been surveyed all at different times, just because of the sheer scale of the survey. But you know, the trend is down, and the really alarming one is down the bottom here. These lower rivers here, they're all in the security site. I should point out the yellow shading, which is sort of a funny greeny shading there. That's the extent of 1080. So these rivers here over in the middle right haven't had 1080 for a long time. Anyway, so Wongapeka Fife security site, which has traps but hasn't had 1080 since 2020, has really plummeted, particularly nearer the edges, those inner parts of the site. I haven't detected any proper change, but the big one here, the Fife, 85% decline, that occurred last winter. So yeah, so it's been an ongoing thing really. And what's going on? Well, this has got to be the big part of it, is the big 2019 mega mast, you know, followed by your high rodent numbers, and then your high predator numbers following, or carnivore predator numbers following that. And we know that from what Susan showed yesterday, that the rats crashed whenever it was, 2020-ish, towards the end of 2020. And the predators were still in high numbers. And I reckon what happens is when the rodents crash, these predators get really, really hungry. And that's, you know, they wouldn't normally take on a big animal like a whio or a kea, but when they're desperately hungry, they're much more likely to. And yeah, so there's some cat stuff that I was going to talk about, but Josh is actually going to go on to the cat stuff. So because we think cats are maybe playing a role in all this as well. So that is actually me. Yeah. So I'm going to hand over to Josh. Yeah.
Cool.
Sweet.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Sorry, Jace didn't have his camera on. Take a
Oh, did I not?
Yeah, Jace. I tried turning it off.
Apologies.
But the mic was all right. Jace.
That's me. You don't need to see me.
That was great. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, I'm Josh. I work with Jace and have worked studied Kia through a lot of that area where Jace was just talking about, and also in other parts of South Island. And with these studies, we've always got this sort of tension between how long do you keep doing these detailed nest survivorship and radio tracking studies for? At what point do you just stop and start monitoring, like doing census counts or relative abundance counts, just to make sure that the predictions you made based on your recruitment and survival study are actually coming true? And this is a case where the intensive monitoring stopped. So there were no radio tagged birds, no nests being monitored with cameras, and just repeated censuses going on. And lovely to have a bird that you can actually go and do a census of and be pretty sure that you've found most of them, which is what Jace was doing with whio on rivers. Trouble is, when things go wrong, when you're just doing census counts, you don't really know why, because you haven't got any smoking guns. So sometimes we have to join dots between studies, which is kind of what I'm going to try and do here a little bit, because what Jason's seen smacks to me a lot of what we saw with Kia. And considering those similarities that Jace pointed out, I think I'm strongly suspicious that we're seeing the same phenomenon as what we saw and wrote up in this paper with this horrendo title that you can't read and remember in a snapshot. So the summary of it is, and sorry for another rhyme, when rodents crash and burn, then it's Kia's turn. And Jace has made me want to add whio into this. Because yeah, I think what we're seeing, we talked a little bit about prey switching yesterday, and this kind of reasonably, I mean, I don't want to, yeah, this idea that birds, that these carnivores switch from rodents to birds, and birds, as John pointed out yesterday, birds aren't birds. We've got big birds, we've got small birds, we've got deeply endemic birds, and we've got more recent arrivals, and they're not all the same. So just talking about prey switch from rodents to birds, I suspect it's a little simplistic in that there's something going on here with a prey size shift, or a prey switch that's not about switching between orders of vertebrates or families, but switching between different sizes of prey. And as Jason suggested, for kiwi, we all know this 1 kilo safe weight for kiwi from stoats. Stoats don't like attacking kiwi that are over 1 kilo, and that's the weight that these birds are. And generally, stoats generally the adults of both of these species are reasonably safe from direct predation, and they suffer nest predation on eggs and chicks, and often the adults actually escape. The predators probably could safely attack these large birds, but they don't know that. They're just kind of, Kia in particular looks pretty pointy and sharp, and might be quite a daunting prey item that they just choose to leave alone most of the time. So the similar study, this is the study where we were doing the intensive radio tracking and nest success work. And in fact, it was just an intensive radio tracking study, because for a bird like Kia, it's adult survival that's the main thing that populations depend on. So we decided to stop studying Kia nests, which we'd studied to death in other places, and to just make sure that we maintained a decent sample of radio tagged males, females, and juveniles and subadults across 3 study areas. And this is over a 30-year time span with some gaps. But Kahurangi, South Westland, and we had this other cluster that we called Eastern, which spanned a huge area from Nelson Lakes to Arthur's Pass. And these are these cold beech forests where eruptions tend to be, rodent eruptions tend to be dominated by mice, and where in between eruptions, they really bottom out to nearly zero. I'm going to show you a big stack of charts which covers the mice, the stoats, the feral cats. Fortunately, in this time of trail cameras, we actually had an index of feral cats. And the third one down, this one here is just to show you our sample size in any given year of kia, to show that we were maintaining at around about 20, sometimes more, sometimes less. And then the bottom chart shows you the number of kia that were killed or died in any given month. And I'm stacking these up to kind of show the timing of stuff. So you can see the classic mouse eruption happening through. This is the 2019-20 beach mast. So going from very low numbers, reaching high tracking rates, and then in the post-mast year, crashing to zero. There's a survey missing here that was COVID lockdown, but from all of our other tracking tunnel data sets from other mast years and other places, we know that mice numbers on tracking tunnels really bomb to zero between May and August. That's correct. So yeah, and then the stope tracking or stope cameras, on cameras, you see this classic kick up in the summer at the beginning of the post-mast year, and those photograph rates remaining high for the next year and a half on this chart. Unfortunately, the study finished at that stage. Feral cat numbers. This is actually in the deep bush. You know, this is not. This study's not taking place sort of out in the rabbit-infested eastern country. So it was, but it's right on the edge. These are the first forests that you get as you move west into the beach forested country, and feral cats are right through that forest through this time, and I think they probably still are. But yeah, perhaps registering a little kick up as the mice numbers dropped, which might be a trackability phenomenon or might be an abundance increase. We can't tell. But the point I want to make here is that for all these radiotagged kia, all through this time when mice numbers were coming up, and cats were present in the presence of mice, stoat numbers were low. We only had one kia death during that time to predation. And in fact, these are all attributed to predation. Kia live for ages. They hardly ever die. And so seeing them suddenly start to die right at the point that the mice crashed, like this didn't really start at the point that the stoats kicked up. There was a bit of a lag. And then we were picking up four dead kia out of a sample of 20 in a month. And that was something we'd never seen before. That was like, this is a big deal. And then it kept on happening for a few months, and then sort of stopped, and we thought, oh, phew, that's good. But we carried on with the study. You can see we caught a few more, radio tagged a few more birds out here. And through the 2021 year, a whole lot of them got killed as well. Crunching these numbers through program mark and getting an official survival rate estimate, the adult survival rates in those 2 years of 2020 and 21 were at 60%. 2019, it's up at 95%, which is about what you need to maintain or grow a kia population. So this is really, really bad news. And 2 years in a row of 60% survival means that we actually lost 2/3 of the adult kia in those valleys over those 2 years. This is a really bad step down for a population that can't recover from that very quickly. We picked up all these dead birds and we swabbed them for DNA, and we got pretty good at telling field sign as well. This is mostly Laura Young going around picking these up and doing most of the hard yards associated with this really hard study. Feral cats often crunch the whole bird up, and they'll crunch through the leg bones and leave a big sort of pile of feathers on the ground. You can see the leg band there with the G on it is not on a leg. Stoats, we think, can't do that. You can see this leg band here is actually still on the leg. And they do dismember the birds, but often you find a whole lot more of the carcass with bits still joined together. And then we're swabbing these corpses and sending swabs or sending the whole corpse up to Ecogene and getting DNA swabs, which often returned both species on the same animal. So there's certainly a bit of scavenging and stuff going on here. It's never easy to get 100% certain of what happened. So yeah, kind of interesting here. And about 50-50 of our we came up with about a 50-50 split between feral cats in the bush and stoats taking out these birds. This kind of solved a riddle for me that I'd been asking myself for a decade or so, being what the heck happened to all the kea at Nelson Lakes. Me and Graham Elliott, we chased kea around Nelson Lakes for about 8 years through the 1990s, doing this intensive radio tracking and nest success stuff. And we predicted from our recruitment versus survival rates that the population was, heaven forbid, stable, which I think we should never say that about populations. They're either increasing or decreasing. Stable is such a tiny fraction of the options that we shouldn't mention it, and unless things are really at carrying capacity and there's no room. But even then, they'll be bouncing up and down. So I vote that we all stop saying, is the population increasing, decreasing, or stable? Let's just drop the stable part. It should have been obvious to us here that something wasn't quite right. There's a whole lot of vacant territory. And I think we just hit a lucky spell in our 8-year study when actually predator numbers were at a bit of a low. And we saw kea chicks jumping out of nests and the adults hardly ever died. So during that period, it was probably a period of population increase, and what we concluded was kind of reasonable. But when we came back 10 years later, and resurveyed or recensused the area, we could only find 3 pairs. There'd been a massive crash, and this is adult birds that should have been living 30-odd years. So I think I think there are some quite strong similarities between what Jason's talking about with the whio and what we've seen here down in this eastern country. And then if we look, so back to my key message of when rodents crash and burn, these carnivores start to get hungry and take on bigger prey. And perhaps, as John mentioned yesterday, perhaps the kea themselves are taking more risks. Perhaps they're hungry too. And kea are foraging on the ground. There's a sort of perception that kea are alpine birds and they can fly very strongly, but they've got this kind of, they can't escape their evolutionary past, and it's pretty clear that kea have lived some long period of their evolutionary history in the absence of tall forest, and this is when they lost the ancestral parrot trait of nesting in trees, started nesting on the ground, and they also learned how to forage on the ground. So kea are diggers. Their bill is a digging shaped bill. It's a weird bill for a parrot. Nesting on the ground is a weird thing for a parrot to do. Nesting every year is a weird thing for a parrot to do. They're supposed to be tied to mast events, which they're not. And so all of this foraging on the ground is something that kea still do, and they forage in the bush right down to the bottom of the valleys, and in fact right down to sea level. And foraging on the ground is not a good place to be if you've got some ambush predators like cats or stoats running around being hungry. If we look at the rat tracking history of Kahurangi National Park, and here I've just taken all the rat tracking tunnels from the whole park over the years, we can see that this 2014 mast event was a big deal, kicked up the rat population, and then they never really crashed back down to zero for quite a number of years. Why exactly this is so, we're not sure, but possibly warm winters has got something to do with it. Probably not the whole picture though. Anyway, by the time the next mast came in 2016, they hadn't crashed to zero, so they kicked up again. They didn't crash to zero again through this intermast period. There was a gap in our tracking history here. Everything fell over for a bit. But then the 2019 mast came, kicked them up again. But then come 2020, we've finally got something of a crash. And I suspect that this crash is something to do with the decline that Jason's observed, and that his big whio were suddenly on the menu. At the same time, through Kahurangi, we've had growing evidence that feral cats have actually established themselves in the deep bush over this period in Kahurangi. This is Jason's looking at a cat footprint beside the Peel stream up in the Cobb, January 2022. Jason's pieced together this map showing all the anecdotal cat sightings and trail camera footage. Trail cameras started being used in Kahurangi as part of our kea nesting success and survival study in 2009. And we didn't see our first cat on a trail camera until 2016. So that's one piece of evidence to suggest that this is a new phenomenon and that, in fact, feral cats haven't been through this park for the whole time. The Friends of Flora started trapping for stoats up in the flora in about 1999. They caught their first cats at around about the same time. There's a few other. If you talk to any ranger who spends a lot of time in the backcountry in the South Island, almost everyone will say that there's been an increase in feral cats in the deep bush in the South Island over the last 5, 6, 7 years. So there we go. I'm running out of time. I've probably got a few more minutes, but to try and join these dots a bit further, I had pulled out this NIWA temperature anomalies chart, which shows the long run average over these years, and then whether a year was colder or warmer. And curiously, it shows that these last two over the whole years were not particularly cold years. And so why the rats crashed in 2020 doesn't really correlate with that. But that's just the whole year. So maybe the winters were cold, or maybe something else happened that led to that rat crash. And in Kahurangi, through this time, mice were not a feature. The rats were so abundant that they were completely squeezing the mice out of the system, as we heard about yesterday. So there we go. We've on the care front, the results of our nesting success and survival study and our monitoring of care through 1080 drops, through all those 1080 drops that Jason went through before. We had radio tags on birds, 71 bird monitoring cases through 1080 drops over 4 of those years. We had 2 kia that died from 1080 poisoning out of that sample. So for Kahurangi, we really don't think 1080 bykill is a big issue there. So we expected, and these 1080 drops were generating an increase in survivorship and nesting success. And modelling all of that out, we were predicting population growth in Kahurangi as we had for Nelson Lakes. Again, I think we struck another period with that nesting success and survival study where things were pretty good on the predator front. And if we had been doing our kia survival studies during the last few years, when feral cats were coming into the system, there's a kia nest in that slot on the base of the tree, and there's a feral cat coming along. I mean, this feral cat didn't take the chicks that were in that nest. And in fact, we've never seen them attacking the birds on the nest. It's always off the nest that happens. So we predicted population growth. When we unfortunately for kia, you can't go and census them like a whio, but we have started this program of a citizen science survey program where people can go out and when they're tramping or hunting in the bush, you can decide you're doing a survey and then just report your hourly presence absence of kia in a 5x5k grid tile. And now I promised people I wouldn't do this too prematurely because our sample size is still not that great and it hasn't been running for very long. But in some parts of this, we've got people like the Friends of Flora, Sandy and Robin Toy, and the Friends of the Cob, and a few other people, Jason himself, have actually clocked up some really quite good hours of kia survey counts. And we calculate the proportion of hours that a kia is either seen or heard. I don't want to get too carried away with it, but it's not looking that flash for kia in Kahurangi nor the whio. And I suspect that's all to do with the incursion of cats into the park and then the combined predation of cats and stoats after a rodent crash on these big birds. So I sort of suspect we've fluffed it a bit in Kahurangi, which you kind of can't afford to do for kia in a way, because everyone will just say it's 1080 is killing them all, which I don't think is the case. I think we've just sort of haven't quite got everything tuned right. The 1080 drops shrunk in 2019 for reasons I explained yesterday. And then perhaps we didn't get the secondary poisoning that we'd hoped for because too many rats, non-toxic rats, were surviving the operations. And another thing that we need to watch out for is ferrets. There's ferrets actually being caught in the Friends of Flora trapping network recently, and a few others seen. And so, with these birds, we need to kind of keep our eyes open for the arrival of these larger carnivores, which I think has probably become an increasing phenomenon as the climate warms. Make sure we actually are measuring their abundance and distribution and understand what our control operations are doing to them. That's my time, our time. Thanks very much. That's it.
Thank you very much, Jason and Josh. That was awesome and very sobering. Thank you very much for all your work on this.